Hi, I'm Danny,
Hi, I'm Mel.
and we're the Sheehan sisters. If you haven't seen our faces before, we like to do podcast and commentary style videos on different topics we like to talk about.
Yes. So, as always, grab your coffee, water, your beverage of choice. Grab your books because we have a lot to talk about today.
Yes, today we are finally doing our book review for the month of July. That was Orwell's 1984. We're so sorry for the late review. It's been a rough couple months for Mel and I. I would say the last 2 to 3 months have been quite the whirlwind.
Yes. Just a lot going on for the two of us. And I started a new job, so it's been hard for us to get on a new filming schedule. But we're here finally doing the review for the July book of the month in the middle of August, but it's okay.
It's okay. We did have a bit of a difficult time with this book. I was sending Mel voice messages and I was saying, how many words can Orwell fit on a page? Because some of these chapters were very dense. I mean, there was even a part at the end where I was like, okay, George Orwell's writing a full dissertation here.
That's exactly how I felt. And then there was the book within the book. And I appreciate his dedication to the world he was creating. And should we just talk about what that world is?
Do you want to give them a quick synopsis?
Yes.
As you all may or may not know, my synopsises tend to be not the quickest, not the smallest. I end up telling you the whole book. I go into all the details.
She starts giving you a play by play. She starts giving a play by play, chapter by chapter. And it's like, wait, we're going to do that in the review. Let's just calm down. But I'm just going to quickly read the back of my book. We're hoping that you all have read it.
Yes, because we tend to jump around in our book reviews. We are going to try to stay a bit more cohesive for this book because there is so much to cover. But we do have a bit of an outline we're going to follow for today's book review. So if you haven't read it and you happen to click on this, or you're trying to avoid reading it for class, I'm not sure if we would be the best people to get a summary from. Don't encourage that.
We don't encourage that, but we are a better alternative than AI.
That is true. We are real. Because if we weren't, I mean, I wouldn't be looking so rough as I do in some of these episodes.
We're steering away already. I'm going to read the synopsis.
Okay, read this out. We'll cut all that.
No, we won't. All right. So, 1984 by George Orwell. It sounds like I'm about to start reading it. Okay. The thought, please, double think, new speak, big brother, 1984 itself, these terms and concepts are all central to our thinking about freedom and its suppression. Yet, they were newly created by George Orwell in 1949 as he conjured his dystopian version of a totalitarian world. The principal characters are ordinary human beings like ourselves. Winston Smith and Julia, whose love is also an act of rebellion against the party. Opposing them are the masked powers of the state. No one is free from surveillance, the truth is constantly altered, and Big Brother controls all. Even the simple act of keeping a diary is punishable by death. In Winston's battle to keep his freedom of thought, his powerful adversary, O'Brien, uses fear and pain to enter his very thought process. Does 2 plus 2 equal 4? Is it 5? We find out in room 101. That was, I feel like, perfect. It mentioned all the key components.
So, do we want to start by expressing our opinions of the book before we go into a little bit of the themes and characters?
Yes. Do you want to tell them what you thought about the book?
I did feel a bit frustrated with the book. I do like Orwell's writing, although I do feel like some of the pages were a bit dense. It wasn't that I struggled to follow along. I guess I was feeling impatient, right? Because I was awaiting the action and the uprising, and unfortunately, it never came. And I think, did I have a feeling of dissatisfaction when I finished reading the book? Slightly, yes, because there was this desire to see the regime being torn down, and I think I had a similar feeling when I read Fahrenheit 451. Although looking back now compared to 1984, Fahrenheit 451 did have a bit more of a hopeful ending than I initially felt. So when I got to the conclusion of 1984, I felt a bit discouraged. What about you?
I understand that. And I enjoyed the book. I liked it. Obviously, like you said, there were parts where I was like, okay, I'm falling asleep. Um, but overall, great book.
I was over here like Julia, falling asleep at certain parts because I was like, okay, where are we going with this?
Right. And I definitely saw the influence this book has had on the books we read previously, Fahrenheit 451, Handmaid's Tales. And in those two books, those authors gave us a little more hope with their endings, a little more optimism that the characters had gotten out. Even though in those books we still didn't see a full rebellion happen, so we don't entirely know what came of those characters, but there's that small hope like, okay, they're free now.
I guess I was hoping to learn something as far as what are the steps I could potentially take to rebel and revolt against this totalitarianism. And I guess what we're all learning is it may not be, not that it may not be possible, but I think unfortunately controlling the masses is I guess what I'm trying to say is that we are more susceptible to control than not.
Yes, and not much has changed since the 1950s, apparently.
And I did think about that for myself, right? Because as much as I do consider myself rebellious at times, I do follow the rules for the most part, right? I follow the laws and I try to be an upstanding, participating citizen, right? But do I also believe that there are rules that are meant to be broken? Absolutely. And I do relate to Julia, who is one of the characters we are going to be discussing today, where she would find loopholes within the system to bend those rules while also being perceived as someone who follows along with the crowd.
Right. And another thing I thought while reading this is this doesn't even really feel like a dystopia. This just feels like life. And I know a lot of people say that Orwell predicted the future, but I think that he wrote this book from his actual point of view. I feel like he put a lot of himself into the character Winston, and I think he was writing about life as he saw it and how he felt it was going to continue into the future. And I don't think it was necessarily a full like psychic prediction. I think he kind of just saw the way things were going and progressing, and he was like, this is what it's leading to. So, the characters that we're going to be discussing today is our main character, Winston, his love interest, Julia, O'Brien, Goldstein, Big Brother, of course, the Proles, and we will mention a few side characters here and there, but those are the main ones. We're introduced to Winston, who works for the party, and I understood the party as working for the government. Did you see it that way?
In a way, yes. I mean, really anyone outside of the proles are forced to work for the party.
Are they forced though, or is that kind of we don't really get a complete origin story from Winston. We get a few flashbacks of his life.
Right. It seems like from what Winston describes, because we're told that nothing is illegal, right? So how the party operates is, oh, if you want to do this, that goes against what we want you to do. Sure, why not? But is there a possibility you might disappear or end up in a labor camp for doing something we don't want you to do? Yeah. So again, it's some sort of psychological warfare where it's like, well, this is your job and this is your lifestyle, and if you go outside of that, you may just disappear one day.
Right. It is a fear-based society, and you're constantly being surveillanced on what is referred to as a telescreen, and they're in your home, they're in your job, they're everywhere you go if you work for the party.
Well, what do you think Orwell, rather, how do you think Orwell would feel knowing that we all keep a small microphone and telescreen right in our pockets on a daily basis?
I would love to know what he thinks, and it's sad that he is not here with us today. And I think he only lived a year after publishing this book, so he really didn't get to see how much technology did advance. And it is interesting that he already kind of felt this, because again, I really do feel like he was writing from his own point of view, like his how he felt about life already in the 50s. And I can't even imagine how he would feel today because we have our laptops.
Well, really the 40s, because he published it in 1949.
Yeah, so he not even the 50s.
But I did read he was basing this off of the Nazi regime, off of what's his name?
Stalin, Joseph Stalin.
Stalin, yeah, Stalin.
Not only do we have our phones, we have our laptops, we have our TVs, we have the Ring cameras, we have dash cams. Everywhere you go, there's cameras everywhere. And I think Danny and I talked about this briefly in another video. It's possible we cut it, but just how even just going for a walk outside, like you're worried about being filmed, you're worried about someone else is filming a video and now you're in the background of that doing something and everyone's watching everyone.
Right, even in this world, everyone is expected to follow the beliefs and principles of the party. And you have even children who are being indoctrinated into this world and being brainwashed from the minute they were born, that end up becoming spies and turning anyone else over that they feel is a traitor. So, regardless of the telescreen or the microphone, you have your neighbors who you're unsure could be spying on you and potentially watching your every behavior and potentially considering you an enemy.
And you just don't know who you can trust. You don't know if you can trust your coworkers. And there's not even friendship or really a family structure in this world either. Like you said, the kids are there mainly just to repopulate and become soldiers or spies or work for the party. They're not there to build this family, warm, loving unit, and no one is even able to have romantic relationships, right? The party has to decide if they want you to get married or not.
Right, and the sole purpose of getting married is to procreate. Because Winston tells us that he was once married to Catherine, but because they were unable to have a child, they I don't know if they were technically divorced, but they were able to separate.
Yes. And it didn't even really feel like there was much love there anyway. He also didn't feel like she really even wanted to be with him. He felt like she was also brainwashed into believing we just have to have a kid and that's what this union is for and that's it.
Right, because Winston started seeking beyond the party, right? He started craving a world outside the party, and he was looking for other people that may feel the way he feels. And it is scary for him to express his emotions and to even be able to express that he is against the party or he doesn't want to follow these principles is dangerous because someone can easily turn him over to the party and they can end up killing him or torturing him. Spoiler alert. So yeah, he was unhappy in that marriage, which did remind me of Guy from Fahrenheit 451, who was testing the waters and challenging his wife because he was also getting fed up with the current society they were stuck in and was seeking freedom and wanted to rebel as well. So Winston is having this internal struggle of who can he trust and how can he get out? How can he get out of this society? How can he change his life? Is it even possible? Who can he turn to? And that's when we learn about the Brotherhood, which is the quote unquote enemy, right? This is the traitor. This is the underground organization that is opposing the party and is run by Emmanuel Goldstein, who becomes the face of the Brotherhood. And it kind of becomes an inkling of hope for Winston to potentially be part of the Brotherhood.
So he begins keeping a diary, which is not allowed, which is just crazy because you really have nowhere to put your thoughts. And again, we notice in this society is they kind of want to stop you from even thinking anyway. So he has no one to talk to and he needs to get something out. He needs to get his emotions out, right? As we do as humans. And he starts keeping a diary, which brings me to the first quote I want to read. So, in my copy of the book, it is on page 8. So, sorry if you have a different copy.
If you have the same copy as I do, it would be page 7. Mel and I were trying to track down the pages when we were reviewing the quotes we want to talk about. So we'll try our best for you all to follow along if you have the copies that we do.
Yes. So, I don't have much I want to say about this particular quote, I just enjoyed it. And it said, either the future would resemble the present, in which case it would not listen to him, or it would be different from it, and his predicament would be meaningless. And this is how Winston was feeling while writing in his diary, because he felt like he needed to tell someone what was going on, right? He needed to give a warning out. He wanted to stop what was happening. He wanted to stop this control of power some way. And he's like, I need to just write it out. And he's debating whether or not it's even worth it to write, because he knows what he's risking writing in this diary, right? But he knows there's a part of him deep down, and we're going to see this throughout the book, where he just knows that this isn't the way that life is meant to be lived.
Absolutely, which is why in both 1984 and Fahrenheit 451, we see the protagonists. It starts with them having this internal conflict and these thoughts that are going beyond their current life, right? Their current lifestyle and their current routine. And that's why we notice the ruling party discourages reading and writing, because they don't want your mind to wander beyond what you're told. So even Winston just picking up a pen and a diary is dangerous. A part of him does feel hopeless because, yes, he can create this diary, and initially he's not sure who he's writing it for, but there is the other part of him that seeks a world in the future that has more freedom, has happiness, isn't full of control and surveillance. So again, we see this battle within him. As much as he desires change, he's unsure if that will ever be a reality.
Right. And that leads me to another quote that kind of just goes along with the one I just read. And this is on page 22.
This is on page 26 in my copy.
So the narration reads, the past was dead, the future was unimaginable. What certainty had he that a single human creature now living was on his side? And what way of knowing that the dominion of the party would not endure forever? And again, that feeling of not being able to trust anyone and not knowing who he can turn to. So we're seeing this constant battle in Winston's mind of not knowing if anyone even feels how he feels about the society he lives in. He thinks everyone is just accepting of what's happening, or that they've been brainwashed and they believe it, right? So that's another thing the party relies on, right? We're talking about earlier how there's spies and there's no friendships, there's no real romance. And the party's whole mission is to isolate everyone and take away any type of freedom of independence, freedom of speech, freedom all around, right? Freedom of expression. Just freedom as a whole, because all he does is go to work, and then he's forced to participate in community events, and those community events are just pushing the agenda of the party.
Right, and I feel the party relies on fear as well, where even Winston is fearful to express his true thoughts because he doesn't know who else would agree with him. And I think that's another way for the party to enact control. And then we also know that there's a war going on, right? This is another overall theme we see in these dystopian worlds, where the ruling class is constantly in war, and they are imposing this threat upon society so that they're in a constant state of fear, they're in a constant state of worry, they're in a constant state of survival. Because we even have a scene, which I want to pull up in a minute as well. We have a scene in an area where the proles live, which we'll talk a little bit more about as well. And the proles are the laboring class, right? They're the lower class. They're not involved in the party because the party views them less than and doesn't even feel like they're intelligent enough to participate in the party, nor do they have to worry about them uprising because they feel like they don't even have the resources, the intelligence, the strength to do anything other than just survive. And this is where we see a lot of the bombings, a lot of where the destruction happens. And this is how the party maintains their control, right? There's this enemy we're fighting, and we all need to collectively come together and hate this enemy. And you have to listen to all of our rules and regulations in order to stay safe. But do we know if there really is an enemy? Do we know if they're really at war? And we see that the enemy is constantly changing, right? This is another part of the book where they're rewriting history constantly. They're destroying books, they're destroying articles. Anytime they want to change information, they're going to go back in history and change any text, article, or book that contradicts the information that is being told now. So there's two enemies, Eurasia and East Asia, and throughout the book, they're constantly interchangeable. It's like, oh, now we're at war with Eurasia, now we're at war with East Asia. And the minute it switches, they need everyone to believe that it was always this way, right? There was never a time where we were at war with Eurasia because it's always been East Asia and vice versa. So this is how they also keep people in a constant state of confusion and fear, right? That's how they maintain their control.
And Winston actually works for the records department, and his job is actually to help rewrite this history, where he'll get articles that were written saying that they were at war with Eurasia, and his main job is to just rewrite everything and reprint it. So if someone were to go back and look at these old news articles, everything, it's funny because it was reminding me of the Mandela effect while reading this, where people think that someone out there is purposefully altering certain things. And in this book, that's what Winston's job is, right? They said, here's a bunch of articles from the past saying that we're at war with Eurasia, and here's a bunch of pictures that show that, and now you need to go in and change all of this. Or, as we mentioned, there's people who disappear. Okay, you need to go back and make sure there's no record of this person. Replace them with a fake person.
I do want to read a part where we learn about this process. And for my copy, it's on page 39. This process of continuous alteration was applied not only to newspapers, but to books, periodicals, pamphlets, posters, leaflets, films, soundtracks, cartoons, photographs, to every kind of literature or documentation which might conceivably hold any political or ideological significance. Day by day, and also minute by minute, the past was brought up to date. In this way, every prediction made by the party could be shown by documentary evidence to have been correct. Nor was any item of news or any expression of opinion, which conflicted with the needs of the moment, ever allowed to remain on record. All history was a palimpsest, scrapped clean and reinscribed exactly as often as was necessary. In no case would it have been possible, once the deed was done, to prove that any falsification had taken place. The largest section of the records department, far larger than the one in which Winston worked, consisted simply of persons whose duty it was to track down and collect all copies of books, newspapers, and other documents which had been which have been superseded and were due for destruction. A number of the times, which might, because of changes in political alignment or mistaken prophecies uttered by Big Brother, have been rewritten a dozen times, still stood on the files bearing its original date, and no other copy existed to contradict it. Books also were recalled and rewritten again and again, and were invariably reissued without any admission that any alteration had been made. And this part actually reminded me of something we're experiencing in our modern times, where they're currently destroying rare books so that AI can replace them, essentially, right? Is that what we learned?
Right. Well, that's what they're trying to spin it as. They're trying to say that AI is going to preserve this text, right? Everything needs to get digitally uploaded, right? Everything's on the clouds. Everything is on the, in cyberspace somewhere. They don't want physical copies of anything anymore.
And you know what? We've talked about this in our book review for All Boys Are in Blue, where we do experience our very own government trying to rewrite history through the classes that we're taking in school, right? The way that they're presenting text of history and the way that they're trying to portray their own country and portraying themselves as the hero, right? And we see it time and time again. It's a way to control their citizens' opinion of the government, right? And we see that Winston is constantly questioning this, even though he knows firsthand, right? This is his job. He's participating in forgery. He's participating in the destruction of evidence. And even though he feels the way he feels, he still shows up to work and he still continues to participate.
Again, I kind of saw it as him working for the government or maybe even working as a journalist. And we see that Winston does enjoy writing and storytelling. And it is interesting that it's right there in front of his face. And he even says it in certain points where he'll get information that contradicts other information. He knows they're lying. And in the book, they call it doublethink. And you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to think about how this is a lie, right? And I thought about us, how we're always like, we're hypocrites, we contradict ourselves. We would be punished because we're not allowed to do that, right?
Well, of course, he's fearful. He knows that he could potentially lose his life. He does notice these contradictory patterns and he is participating in it, but he also knows, or rather, he also feels like there's no life beyond that. So even we do see there is a part in the book where he does find proof that the party lied about a specific news story, and it had to do with these 3 party members who were framed as traitors. And Winston finds a photograph that proves they weren't where the party says they were, and he does end up destroying it despite having tangible proof that can show everyone else, hey, look, the party lied about these 3 members. But ultimately he's still brainwashed himself, and he's still controlled because he goes along with destroying evidence. He goes along with destroying articles and rewriting history. But then again, he does have pleasure in creating the new stories. So that's his creative outlet to some sort of self-expression to a degree.
Yes. And like most writers, or hopefully all writers, he loves words and vocabulary. And that's another thing that this party is trying to destroy, right? Because they don't want people thinking. So the less words there are, the less there is to talk about, the less there is to think about, and the younger generations will all have been born into this truly weird dystopian world. And that brings me to the conversation that him and Siamese has, right? So Siamese works, he basically is writing the dictionaries, right? That's his job.
Yes, he's creating a new edition of the dictionaries and he's destroying words. Because, like Mel was saying, the less words, the less people can form any opinion outside of the vocabulary they're given.
Yes. And I want to read this quick quote and then we can talk about this conversation as a whole. But Siamese says to him, has it ever, I'm sorry, this is on page 41 for me. He says, has it ever occurred to you, Winston, that by the year 2050, at the very latest, not a single human being will be alive who could understand such a conversation as we are having now? And we're not too far off from that. We're in the year 2026 and we're experiencing a literacy crisis. People are not reading anymore. We even said ourselves that we haven't been reading, and that even now when we do read, we're finding it hard to focus because we're so used to all of these dopamine hits that we're getting from Instagram and TikTok and just YouTube videos. And I know this is a YouTube video, but just all this instant gratification from our screens, right?
Right, and even reading this book, there were plenty of words that I ended up noting because I had to look up the definition. And that's normal. I mean, you're not going to know every single word in the English language, right?
Exactly.
They do want their society to be dumb, right? The rise of anti intellectualism, because that's the easiest way to control the population. And we see Saimi getting so excited to destroy these words. And there was a part I wanted to read as well as he's talking to Winston. He says, "It's a beautiful thing, the destruction of words. Of course, the great wastage is in the verbs and adjectives, but there are hundreds of nouns that can be got rid of as well. It isn't only the synonyms, there are also the antonyms. After all, what justification is there for a word which is simply the opposite of some other words? A word contains its opposite in itself. Take good, for instance. If you have a word like good, what need is there for a word like bad? Ungood will do just as well. Better, because it's an exact opposite, which the other is not. Or again, if you want a stronger version of good, what sense is there in having a whole string of vague, useless words like excellent and splendid and all the rest of them? Plus good covers the meaning. Or double plus good if you want something stronger still. Of course, we use those forms already, but in the final version of Newspeak, there'll be nothing else. In the end, the whole notion of goodness and badness will be covered by only 6 words. In reality, only 1 word. Don't you see the beauty of that, Winston? It was BB's idea originally. Of course, he added as an afterthought. BB is Big Brother. If you didn't get that context clues there. But I noticed that too, right? We start to incorporate in our modern world, we're using internet slang in everyday dialogue, right? Or we'll shorten words and we'll use
Language is forever changing, and I'm hoping that we're adding words. I'd rather us add words than take words away, right? Where would I ever read a book that was just fully just written in internet slang? I don't think I'd be able to. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think it's okay when you're talking with friends and having a free flowing conversation to speak in a relaxed tone, right? But I think, especially within the context of storytelling and poetry and art and movies, we want to keep vocabulary alive, I guess, right? We want to keep intellectualism alive. And as you were just mentioning, even context clues, like we're losing that. We're losing we're losing the plot.
But there's also a beauty in language. Like Simon points out, oh, what's the use of using words like excellent and splendid? But that's the beauty of being descriptive, is that there is this vast vocabulary that we can look to form an image. You're able to use these descriptive words to create that world. And if we do destroy, if there is a destruction of all of these words, then we're losing imagination as well. Do you agree?
I do agree, yes. And I think about, again today, how if people aren't reading, then they're not learning new words, right? And if they're only speaking in internet slang, then they're still not learning new words. Or how it's perceived as pretentious and to use certain words when you're like, I just want to use these. Like, the English language is so vast, and then there's even more languages out there. It's like, we you should want to learn. I don't understand that. Why do why do people not want to learn? Because I'm listening to this. I'm not listening. I'm reading this conversation. You could be listening if it's an audiobook. That's not my thing. But I'm reading this conversation and I'm thinking about how there are people out there who would be like, yeah, we don't need all these words.
I do want to read a little bit more from this page and the next, and then we can move on. But I just wanted to point out more of Winston's characteristics. And I think as much as Winston tries to hide his real feelings, it does come out in his actions. I'll relate this later on when we talk about O'Brien. But Saimi tells him, "You haven't a real appreciation of Newspeak, Winston," he said almost sadly. Even when you write it, you're still thinking in old speak. I read some of those pieces that you write in the Times occasionally. They're good enough, but they're translations. In your heart, you'd prefer to stick to old speak, with its vagueness and its useless shades of meaning. You don't grasp the beauty of the destruction of words. Do you know that Newspeak is the only language in the world whose vocabulary gets smaller every year? And I'm going to skip ahead slightly, where Saimi continues and says, "Don't you see that the whole aim of Newspeak is to narrow the range of thought? In the end, we shall make thought crime literally impossible, because there will be no words in which to express it. Every concept that can ever be needed will be expressed by exactly one word, with its meaning rigidly defined and all its subsidiary meanings rubbed out and forgotten. Already, in the 11th edition, we're not far from that point. But the process will still be continuing long after you and I are dead. Every year, fewer and fewer words, and the range of consciousness always a little smaller. Even now, of course, there's no reason or excuse for committing thought crime. It's merely a question of self-discipline, reality control. But in the end, there won't be any need even for that." Winston is constantly looking back into the past and questioning whether life was better or there was more happiness when he was younger. There's even a scene towards the end of the book where he is toasting to the past because there's a part of him that is searching for something meaningful he once felt and wants to potentially bring that into the future. So there's this constant reflection of the past, but also the wonder of possibility for the future. And I don't know if you want to start to get into Julia, but I think Julia becomes. I think Julia helps him envision a more hopeful future. Despite her being younger than him, and there is a difference in the way they both were raised, because she was already indoctrinated into the party, whereas Winston can still look back upon a childhood before the revolution, before Big Brother. I think when he was younger, right? That's when they were starting to create Big Brother, right?
Yes. And I think Julia definitely is a symbol of hope for Winston because, as we mentioned earlier, he was married and he didn't feel chemistry or romance with her, right? So now we meet Julia, who shows him that he can rebel and he's been wanting to rebel, right? He has the diary. He keeps having these thoughts day by day of what's the point of all this? And Julia kind of like lights that spark underneath him.
Yes, Julia is a free spirit. She's whimsical. She is a rebel, but like I've mentioned earlier, she still conforms, but her way of rebelling is finding loopholes and sneaking in and out of the conformity.
Yes, and even when Winston meets her, which I knew right away that this was going to be a possible love interest cuz why else would he point out this character if she wasn't going to be important later on? Where he sees her and he despises how much she partakes in these events. So we didn't mention this, but they do the 2 minute hate where they watch a video of the enemy, which is Goldstein, who has apparently built the Brotherhood or rebellion or tried to rebel. And Julia plays it up, right? She's playing it up for these cameras that are watching. She's throwing things at the screen. She's participating in all the community events. She's really acting like an upstanding citizen. So he believes that there's no way she could ever understand how he feels. And to his surprise, she's rebelling way more than Winston is, right? Winston just has this little diary. She has all the connections to the black market. She's hooking up with all the party members.
Right. And we even see before they have their interaction, there's almost a hatred for her because he has an attraction to her. And again, in this society, you're not supposed to have any type of pleasure. There is no attraction for someone else. Everything is transactional. If you're married to someone, you're not supposed to be attracted to them. You're not supposed to be in love with them. The whole purpose of being in a marriage, again, is just to procreate and to continue creating party members, essentially. And
Exactly.
we finally get to the part where Julia slips a note to Winston, and the note says, "I love you." And I have to say, I was so excited during this part because I was like, yes, we're getting to some action.
Very bold of her.
Very bold of her.
He's still unsure if this is a trap. Is she a spy? Can she be trusted?
Well, when they do finally meet, were you skeptical of her? Did you feel as though she was going to be someone trustworthy?
No, I knew it from the beginning. From the first line of him introducing her, I think as the dark haired woman is how he described her. I just knew. I think I've read enough, I've watched enough movies, I saw the plot twist coming, and I kept thinking about Severance while reading this book.
Yeah.
A lot of the scenes of him at his job, a lot of the characters, like I really felt like the show Severance was influenced by 1984. And so I felt the love story coming. What did you think?
So when they when they finally meet and they do end up sleeping together, and she reveals that she sleeps with inner party members, and I was a bit disappointed because I was like, oh, maybe she's just manipulative, and I was skeptical. I don't know. I was like, maybe she is sent out by inner party members to seduce men. I wasn't sure where that character was going to go. But we learned that she is trustworthy and they do actually fall in love.
Yes, and after their first day together on page 97, um I'm just gonna read like a very short line. It says it was a political act, and I think originally it started as, okay, this is just a fun, exciting thing, and we're rebelling. And like you said, it does turn into love. I think eventually they both genuinely do end up caring and loving one another. And also, as I mentioned, Julia lit this spark under Winston because he's like, yes, finally there's someone out there who's showing me that rebellion is possible and he wants to take it further, right? And as we mentioned too, like Julia, yeah, she likes to be, I keep using the word rebel and rebellion, but she likes to go against the grain, do whatever she wants, tries not to get caught, and doesn't really even care to look deeper into what the party is and what Big Brother is and what all of this is. And even when Winston tries to talk to her about that stuff, she seems very disinterested. But I do see the love between them because he is like, okay, there's something worth living for and fighting for. And that does lead the both of them to searching for this so called brotherhood.
I'm going to read a couple parts where we learn more about Julia. And in my copy, this is on page 131, where the narrator says, life as she saw it was quite simple. You wanted a good time. They, meaning the party, wanted to stop you having it. You broke the rules as best you could. She seemed to think it just as natural that they should want to rob you of your pleasures as that you should want to avoid being caught. She hated the party and said so in the crudest words, but she made no general criticism of it. Except where it touched upon her own life, she had no interest in party doctrine. He noticed that she never used new speak words, except the ones that had passed into everyday use. She had never heard of the Brotherhood, and refused to believe in its existence. Any kind of organized revolt against the party, which was bound to be a failure, struck her as stupid. The clever thing was to break the rules and stay alive all the same. He wondered vaguely how many others like her there might be in the younger generation. People who had grown up in the world of the revolution, knowing nothing else, accepting the party as something unalterable, like the sky, not rebelling against its authority but simply evading it, as a rabbit dodges a dog. So, like you mentioned, initially she doesn't believe there is a brotherhood. And I do think we see there are moments where she is a bit more keen than Winston is. And she tries to have more of a realistic approach to her rebellion, where she kind of feels like, okay, this reality is inevitable. We're forced to conform. So I'll just find my loopholes, and I'll find my ways to be disobedient so that I can stay alive and have my fun, but the party will never know that I'm insubordinate. But it's not until their relationship continues that their love brings them closer, and she does want to believe in the brotherhood because Winston believes in the brotherhood, and she is loyal to Winston to the point where she decides to join the brotherhood, which we'll talk about in just a moment when we talk about O'Brien. I was initially frustrated with their relationship because I felt like they were just staying in their little bubble and they were falling in love. And I felt like Winston was losing his motivation to revolt against the system, even though their love in it of itself is a rebellion, is an act of rebellion. But I wanted I wanted to see more action taken on his part. I understand there's always a love story, right? In every story. And I was worried that he would accept that their relationship was enough, and he may not feel like they could they could revolt against the party, and I thought maybe they were just going to have their little life and their little relationship and not make a change within the system.
And we saw that in The Handmaid's Tales, where Offred starts her love affair and starts to feel like, well, I can't act out because now giving them a reason to live, giving them hope. And again, like you said, it is still an act of rebellion, but is it leading the uprise, right? And I love stories, and I love that love. I'm gonna keep saying love for a few minutes. I love that love has brings hope, right? And that's just the reality of life. You have your family and your friends, and maybe you have a partner, maybe you have pets, but you have love in your life for people and even for your things. And love is what is keeping you going, right? Hopefully. And you think about how, oh, well, I can't risk too much and I can't act out too much because if I'm gone, then I'm leaving my loved ones behind. And again, that is a reason that the party isolates, because it knows that love is so strong and powerful. And we're gonna see down the road that they even tear apart Julia and Winston. And love didn't conquer all. Sadly, it almost did. I was really happy at certain points. And like you said, the book just took away all that. And that, again, life will really do that to you.
Well, like you mentioned, their love was a political act.
It was. And for some people, that's enough, right? Because think about even now, there's so many people whose love is still a political act.
Absolutely.
We move on. Are we going to move on? We're still going to talk about Julia. We're not moving on from their relationship and that character.
I just want to read a little bit more. So in my book, it's page 152, and Winston and Julia continuously find ways to meet, and they have their little love affair. And Julia's bringing them coffee and sugar and all these things from the black market that they no longer have access to, and only the inner party members have access to it. And they really do find joys within their secret relationship. So they have multiple conversations of their potential future, but like we mentioned, there is part of Julia that she is willing to she's willing to take risks, but only if it makes sense, right? Only if the risks are worth the reward. And I don't know if she necessarily feels, because she doesn't feel like there is a true traitor or a true enemy or a true underground society like the Brotherhood, that she accepts the current life she's living because she feels as though she has found ways to take risks that keep her alive but also allows her some sort of happiness, right? So on page 152 it says, sometimes too they talked of engaging in active rebellion against the party, but with no notion of how to take the first step. Even if the fabulous Brotherhood was a reality, there still remained the difficulty of finding one's way into it. He told her of the strange intimacy that existed, or seemed to exist, between himself and O'Brien, and of the impulse he sometimes felt simply to walk into O'Brien's presence, announce that he was the enemy of the party, and demand his help. Curiously enough, this did not strike her as an impossibly rash thing to do. She was used to judging people by their faces, and it seemed natural to her that Winston should believe O'Brien to be trustworthy on the strength of a single flash of the eyes. Moreover, she took it for granted that everyone, or nearly everyone, secretly hated the party and would break the rules if he thought it safe to do so. But she refused to believe that widespread, organized opposition existed or could exist. The tales about Goldstein and his underground army, she said, were simply a lot of rubbish which the party had invented for its own purposes and which you had to pretend to believe in. Times beyond number, at party rallies and spontaneous demonstrations, she had shouted at the top of her voice for the execution of people whose names she had never heard and in whose supposed crimes she had not the faintest belief. But when public trials were happening, she had taken her place in the detachments from the Youth League who surrounded the courts from morning to night, chanting at intervals, "Death to the traitors!" During the 2-minute hates, she always excelled all others in shouting insults at Goldstein. Yet she had only the dimmest idea of who Goldstein was and what doctrines he was supposed to represent. She had grown up since the Revolution and was too young to remember the ideological battles of the 50s and 60s. Such a thing as an independent political movement was outside her imagination. And in any case, the party was invincible. It would always exist, and it would always be the same. You can only rebel against it by secret disobedience, or, at most, by isolated acts of violence such as killing somebody or blowing something up. In some ways, she was far more acute than Winston, and far less susceptible to party propaganda. Once, when he had happened in some connection to mention the war against Eurasia, she startled him by saying casually that in her opinion, the war was not happening. The rocket bombs which fell daily on London were probably fired by the government of Oceania itself, just to keep people frightened. This was an idea that had literally never occurred to Winston. She also stirred a sort of envy in him by telling him that during the 2-minute hates, her great difficulty was to avoid bursting out laughing. But she only questioned the teachings of the party when they in some way touched upon her own life. Often she was ready to accept the official mythology, simply because the difference between truth and falsehood did not seem important to her. I'm going to skip ahead just slightly. It was true that she regarded the whole war as a sham, but apparently she had not even noticed that the name of the enemy had changed. "I thought we'd always been at war with Eurasia," she said vaguely. It frightened Winston a little. He argued with her about it for perhaps a quarter of an hour. In the end, he succeeded in forcing her memory back until she did dimly recall that at one time, East Asia and not Eurasia had been the enemy. But the issue still struck her as unimportant. Who cares? She said impatiently. It's always one bloody war after another, and one knows the news is all lies anyway.
She said fake news. Which, I mean, is true. Like, he's mad at her for saying it, but he's one of the people writing the news. That
Right, it's almost as though she takes everything as a lie and doesn't believe in any of it, right? Doesn't really care for the party, doesn't believe in the opposition, doesn't believe in the enemy. But it's almost as though Winston needs there to be this underground organization in order to retain some sort of hope. He can't just accept that, yes, they're all lies and we're going to have to conform, but I'll find ways to rebel within the system. He needs there to be a source of hope. He needs there to be a source of change. He can't fathom the idea that the future will always remain this way.
I think he also can't fathom that there isn't a real enemy. Like, he's almost there, but he's not. It's like, yes, the enemy is Big Brother. And we even see that today where bombs are being dropped and they're trying to convince people that there is an enemy and that there is a villain out there that is being attacked, but it's just innocent people. And I know we were maybe going to wait to get into this, but we see that where she's talking about, oh, the government's probably dropping these bombs themselves. And we see that where the proles live, they're constantly in a war zone.
Right.
And I just briefly wanted to bring that up because while they're having this love affair, they're staying in a secret apartment that's in the neighborhood of the proles. And outside the window is a woman who's constantly singing and doing her laundry that Winston often is looking at. And Winston looks at Julia with a sort of envy, and he also looks at this woman washing her clothes with envy, where she's singing, and he feels as though she has more freedom than he does because she doesn't live with a telescreen and she isn't constantly being watched. And he's viewing her as someone who is living ignorantly, right? He's seeing it as, oh, ignorance is bliss. She has no idea what's going on. When she's actually living in an active war zone, she's living in poverty. He doesn't understand how she can still be singing, right? Or how she can come across so carefree. And that's the same with Julia, where he doesn't understand how she is also carefree. He doesn't understand why no one is in more of a panic. Why isn't the uprise coming? And even as you're reading the book, you're like, where's the uprise? And even in our real life, we're like, where's the uprise?
Right.
But then there's also Winston, where it's like, okay, so you start the uprise, right? We're all waiting for each other. We're all waiting for someone else.
Right. Well, since we're talking about the proles, there was a quote you marked down. I was trying to find it in my copy.
Can you tell me? Yeah, I did want to read that.
Where Winston is saying the proles and animals are free. It's ironic. We're looking at Winston like, will you be the leader of this rebellion? But he's looking at the proles because the proles is the larger population, right? There's more proles than party members. And he feels as though if the proles realize their strength in numbers, that they could be the source of the rebellion.
Right. And on page 56, he gives us a brief introduction or description of the proles. And he says, the great majority of proles did not even have telescreens in their homes. Even the civil police interfered with them very little. There was a vast amount of criminality in London, a whole world within a world of thieves, bandits, prostitutes, drug peddlers, and racketeers of every description. But since it all happened among the proles themselves, it was of no importance. In all questions of morals, they were allowed to follow their ancestral code. The sexual puritanism of the party was not imposed upon them. Promiscuity went unpunished, divorce was permitted. For that matter, even religious worship would have been permitted if the proles had shown any sign of needing or wanting it. They were beneath suspicion. As the party slogan put it, proles and animals are free. The proles are the working class, and Winston works for Big Brother. He works for the party. And again, that's why I saw it as Winston kind of working for the government, because as I'm reading this, I'm also thinking about how much we would scrutinize a president or a senator if they were to get a divorce, if they were sexually promiscuous, if they were doing drugs. And he's kind of seeing that too, where he's like, I'm not allowed to do any of these things, but here's this whole world where people are buying prostitutes and selling drugs, and it doesn't seem like anything's being done about it, right? And Julia is smart. She understands what's really going on, and she understands, well, this is just kind of what the government is allowing, right? And we're seeing that too, where it's like, this is their way to control people, right? Like, let them do all that stuff because they're not important to me. But Winston is important. His role and his function in society is important to them.
And Julia also realizes that the inner party members are partaking in their own promiscuity.
Right, they're still doing that as well.
We saw that in The Handmaid's Tales as well, where the men were still partaking in crude behavior and they had that secret bar. So just to continue, we have Winston pondering on the proles. If there was hope, it must lie in the proles, because only there, in those swarming, disregarded masses, 85% of the population of Oceania, could the force to destroy the party ever be generated. The party could not be overthrown from within. Its enemies, if it had any enemies, had no way of coming together or even of identifying one another. Even if the legendary brotherhood existed, as just possibly it might, it was inconceivable that its members could ever assemble in large numbers than twos and threes. Rebellion meant a look in the eyes, an inflection of the voice, at the most, an occasional whispered word. But the proles, if only they could somehow become conscious of their own strength, would have no need to conspire. They needed only to rise up and shake themselves like a horse shaking off flies. If they chose, they could blow the party to pieces tomorrow morning. Surely sooner or later, it must occur to them to do it. And I just want to skip ahead a tiny bit. He remembered how once he had been walking down a crowded street when a tremendous shout of hundreds of voices, women's voices, had burst from a side street a little way ahead. It was a great, formidable cry of anger and despair. A deep, loud, "Oh, oh, oh," that went humming on like the reverberation of a bell. His heart had leapt. It started, he thought, a riot. The proles are breaking loose at last. When he had reached the spot, it was to see a mob of 200 or 300 women crowding around the stalls of a street market, with faces as tragic as though they had been the doomed passengers on a sinking ship. But at this moment, the general despair broke down into a multitude of individual quarrels. It appeared that one of the stalls had been selling tin saucepans. They were wretched, flimsy things, but cooking pots of any kind were always difficult to get. Now the supply had unexpectedly given out. The successful women, bumped and jostled by the rest, were trying to make off with their saucepans while dozens of others clamored round the stall, accusing the stall-keeper of favoritism and of having more saucepans somewhere in reserve. There was a fresh outburst of yells. Two bloated women, one of them with her hair coming down, had got a hold of the same saucepan and were trying to tear it out of one another's hands. For a moment, they were both tugging, and then the handle came off. Winston watched them disgustedly, and yet, just for a moment, what almost frightening power had sounded in that cry from only a few hundred throats? Why was it that they could never shout like that about anything that mattered? And we see a tactic the party uses is lack of resources, right? And we even see that in our modern world where there's this illusion of limited resources so that the population are fighting amongst themselves for it. So we're seeing that the pros are clamoring and fighting over these saucepans, and Winston is getting frustrated because in that moment he thought that they were uprising, right? He thought all this yelling was something of substance. He thought it was meaningful, and he was frustrated that it was only over flimsy saucepans. But to the pros, those are valuable items, right? Because that's what the party is instilling in them. They want them to have a lack of resource so that when there is anything they'll consider useful and valuable, they'll fight over it amongst themselves. And we see that even within the party, right, where Winston is hiding these razor blades in his apartment, and his coworkers are asking him if he has any, and his immediate response is to tell them no.
Exactly. And I even think about in 2020 when everyone was grabbing all the toilet paper. And it's just like, what are we what are we doing? And we see it in like a zombie apocalypse movie where people are hoarding their supplies. But it's not even a dystopian future or apocalyptic movie. It's real life where people are hoarding wealth. We have literal billionaires and trillionaires, right?
Right. Manipulating markets, manipulating prices, having people fight over fruits and vegetables and food.
They, again, supply and demand, right? We're living in a consumerism, capitalistic world. And he's confused why they're not uprising, but they're already living in a war zone. They're already living in poverty. They don't have much resources.
They're in survival mode, and that's why the party isn't afraid of them, because they can't think of anything but their day to day, right? Surviving their day, waking up, finding food, feeding their families, evading danger. They don't have the time to critically think of the situation they're currently living in. They don't even have the resources and the education to create a plan, to even have the possibility of creating a revolt. And that's why the government doesn't surveil them, because they aren't educated. They believe they aren't educated enough to enact such an uprising.
And it's not even a belief. They know they're not, because they've taken away the books. We're not hearing about the children going to school, right? So the children of the party are being put into boot camps to become spies or soldiers. And we don't know what's happening with the children of the proles, right? They're probably being put into the labor camps for all we know. But I want to jump ahead to page 155. I just want to read this quote, and then we can get into O'Brien and Winston's final acts of rebellion. But on this page it says, From the point of view of the low, no historic change has ever meant much more than a change in the name of their masters. And even in our own reality where it's, a constant change in who's in charge. And that's what's happening here too. And I think Winston is also seeing that, where there isn't even a real face of Big Brother, right? It's just a name that's put out there.
Well, the mystery is purposeful, right? They have this illusion of the party of Big Brother, and there doesn't need to be a concrete face of it, because as long as the party and everyone else believes that there's this overseeing force, that's all that matters. It's kind of like the Wizard of Oz, right?
Yes. Probably also, maybe also inspired, or no, did it come out? Came out before this.
This they're creating this illusion of this almighty force that you have to be aware of. Big Brother's watching. You're gonna die. You're gonna disappear because there's Big Brother all around. And again, there doesn't need to be one particular person that represents Big Brother, because they've instilled it in everyone to be Big Brother, right? The whole party is Big Brother.
And Winston finally gets this peek behind the curtain when he starts to interact with O'Brien, right? Where at first he's led to believe that O'Brien is part of this secret brotherhood that has possibly existed.
I really thought O'Brien might actually be part of the Brotherhood. I was so disappointed.
I was not feeling it. I was not trusting it.
You weren't convinced?
I was not convinced. And there's a part that both you and I marked, right? That within the first initial meeting with O'Brien, that we were both like,
Yeah, that was weird.
it raised a lot of questions for us. So Winston and Julia go to O'Brien to admit that they are rebels and they are against the party and they're done with Big Brother, right? They're kind of taking a shot at the wind, right? They're trying to see if they said either way, we're probably going to get caught and we might as well just see what happens. And O'Brien leads them to believe that there is a brotherhood and asks them a series of questions to see how true they are to overthrowing Big Brother. And this is what raised the questions for me. This is what solidified it for me, honestly. In my book, it's page 132.
I believe it's page 172 for me. Yes. So O'Brien is asking them a series of questions of what they'll be willing to do as part of the Brotherhood. So he asks, "You are prepared to give your lives?" And Winston is the only one responding on behalf of him and Julia. So O'Brien says, "You are prepared to give your lives?" Yes. "You are prepared to commit murder?" Yes. "To commit acts of sabotage which may cause the death of hundreds of innocent people?" Yes. "To betray your country to foreign powers?" Yes. "You are prepared to cheat, to forge, to blackmail, to corrupt the minds of children, to distribute habit-forming drugs, to encourage prostitution, to disseminate venereal diseases, to do anything which is likely to cause demoralization and weaken the power of the party?" Yes. "If, for example, it would somehow serve our interests to throw sulfuric acid in a child's face, are you prepared to do that?" Yes. "You are prepared to lose your identity and live out the rest of your life as a waiter or a dock worker?" Yes. "You are prepared to commit suicide if and when we order you to do so?" Yes. And then one of his final questions was, "You are prepared, the two of you, to separate and never see one another again?" "No," broke in Julia.
And I was just like, what is going on here? Like, Winston is kind of losing his mind. Why is he agreeing blindly yes to all of these things? I'm like, this doesn't sound right. This is fishy because these are almost things that Big Brother is doing. So if he were to try to go against Big Brother, why would he commit similar acts to them, right? It doesn't make any sense.
Right. And that's how I was feeling reading this. I was like, well, why would the Brotherhood need to throw sulfuric acid in a child's face?
And as we learn, O'Brien is a snake. He is not trustworthy. And he throws this back into Winston's face later on, where he kind of puts a mirror to Winston's face and says, "Look, you're not any better because you agreed to do all of these things."
Right. But he was so blindly hopeful that this may enact a large scale change for the betterment of society that he unquestionably, you know, agreed. He unquestionably agreed because we see this overall theme within Winston of having the hopefulness of a brighter future, where he wasn't even thinking twice about these questions. He just wanted to be part of the opposition.
But he should be questioning both.
Question everything. And this reminded me again of Fahrenheit 451, where the main protagonist in that novel, Guy, was questioning his rebellion because he didn't want to leave one society, one brainwashed society for another.
Right? And we see Winston doing that. And I was very thrown off by that. I didn't like that because I was like, no, that's not the point of rebellion. We're not going to harm children. We should be saving the children.
Right, and O'Brien thought he was proving Big Brother's point, right? Look how far you're willing to go for your cause, and that's what we do.
Yes. And eventually we come to find out, like I said, O'Brien is not trustworthy. And this little apartment where they've been staying had a secret telescreen and microphone in it the whole time.
I'm so disappointed in Mr. Charrington, who we didn't speak of. He was a brief side character. He was the shop owner. And ultimately, he was part of the party, right?
Right, he may also have been a spy. Again, it it's kind of he's a Karen, right?
Stop. No.
he we mentioned this earlier how like we're all in this world they're all surveilling each other, and we're seeing that more and more in our own world where we're all just surveilling one another. And I finally put this together, right? I kept thinking about how Winston is afraid of rats, and I thought how silly that is. And later on, that comes back to him again, where his number one fear is rats. And then I thought about how rats are seen as someone who snitches on another person, right? So I was starting to be like, oh, okay, I see the connection. And that's what Mr. Charrington is. And so,
Right, and now looking back, I see the foreshadow when Julia and Winston are laying in bed and there's a rat that comes out of the hole in the floor, and Winston starts freaking out. And I was like, okay, this is foreshadowing that there's a rat in the room. There's a telescreen behind the photo. And at one point, Julia says, oh, there's probably bugs behind that painting. I should take it down and clean it. And I'm like, oh, if only she did that, they could have noticed earlier there was a telescreen behind it. But ultimately, they were going to get caught, right? They've been doing this for weeks on end. They were just, Big Brother was just building up their case and building their evidence to capture them.
Yes. So Winston gets thrown into jail, right? And I also thought it was interesting that while he's in there, people he knows are also being thrown in there. And he's surprised as well that they're in there. There's one person we also didn't mention, which was Parsons, who gets betrayed by his own children, right? We mentioned the children are the spies, and he's so proud of them. He's like, yeah, they're just such great spies. They're so good at their job, and he's like, well, if they said I did something wrong, then I must have, right? He's kind of the dumb character, right? He's kind of this willfully ignorant.
Yes. Blindly follows the party. And it was in his sleep, really, that he was saying something that was against the party involuntarily. Or maybe subconsciously, he also opposed the party. I think most people do, but it's very deep within them. I wasn't sure why they killed Saimi. Why did Saimi disappear? Because I thought he was a good allegiance to the party.
Well, and I mean, I'm going to spiral into like my whole theories of life maybe for a second, because that's what I was getting into, where he's noticing people getting thrown into the prison. And I think in some sense, everyone is rebelling, right? No one is perfect. And maybe he's not even disappearing. Maybe he actually just died. Maybe there was a car accident. Maybe he had an illness. Briefly, hopefully this doesn't stray away too much, I want to read a quote from the beginning of the book that pertains to this, where it's on page 24, right? And Winston is thinking about his mom, who also disappeared, right? He mentions his mom disappeared, his dad disappeared, and we don't know fully what's happening with these disappearances. Are all of these people being thrown into jail and tortured? Are they being murdered? What are they running away, right? What is the true, what is really happening with these disappearances, right? And on this page it says, tragedy he perceived belonged to the ancient time, to a time when there was still privacy, love, and friendship, and when the members of a family stood by one another without needing to know the reason. And again, I think even if these characters were somehow just dying naturally, the party doesn't give room to grieve. There's no funeral procession. There's no mention of this person again, right? They don't exist. And that's another thing we see in other books we've read, where there is no time to grieve. You just have to keep moving on with your days, right? So to bring it all back together, right? We don't know what happened to Saimi, and we may never know what happened to him.
I suppose I have a slight theory as we're talking through it.
Okay, what do you think happened?
I do think Winston hints to Saimi's arrogance, so perhaps Saimi thought he was even smarter than Big Brother, and they ultimately knew they had to remove him.
Right, and that's what I'm saying. He does say, oh, Saimi's not going to last, but then he believes that Parson will last. Parson would never get caught, and then we see Parson does. So it's eventually you're going to meet your demise. So what happens is people get thrown into jail as their offense, and then they get questioned and tortured. And this part reminded me of being in, not that I've been in one, but being in some kind of psychiatric ward, right? I was thinking back to the Bell Jar, which we haven't talked about on this channel, but maybe in the future we will. But in the bell jar, the main character gets put into a psychiatric ward and then under shock therapy, right? They're trying to get her back to normal, right? And this is something we've seen in history where certain people were given shock treatment because for whatever reason doctors or the government or their family just felt like, oh, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, you're not acting the way you should be acting, so there must be something wrong with you, your brain isn't working properly. And that's what happens here with Winston, where they believe, oh, you're questioning too much and you're not believing the right things. You need to believe what we're telling you and nothing else.
Which is very difficult for Winston, right? We see throughout the weeks of the torment and the torture, there is still a part of him that wants to believe that Big Brother will be torn down, that there will be the uprising, that the human spirit will win. But ultimately, but you know what? I was gonna say ultimately it doesn't, but I still think in the depths of Winston, there is a part of him that feels that way, and perhaps some possibility of the future, the human spirit will win and will overcome and will take down Big Brother, and like you said, love will conquer.
And that's something that happens too, where O'Brien is the one that's torturing Winston in this case, right? He's really trying to break down his spirit, which is what the world does to you, right? It really tries to break you down. And he clings on to his love for Julia. He's like, I'm not betraying Julia, right? So again, hoping that love will conquer all, but again, they play into your biggest fears and they do get him to betray Julia. And then they send them back into society, right? Because they know that after all they've done to them, they'll never be the same. They'll never be together. Right? So who knows what has happened to all these characters before, his mother, his father, Saimi. Maybe they also got tortured. Maybe they were also subjected to this weird shock treatment and sent to room 101, and either they weren't able to break and they were killed, or maybe they did send them back into society somewhere else, right? We don't know what's happening to everyone, because here they were able to break Winston and Julia and they sent them back out into the world, believing that they were never going to rebel again.
It was upsetting because they did make a pact to one another that they wouldn't betray each other. And there's a scene at the end where they do get to see each other one more time after all the torment and torture. It's on page 292 in my copy. They sat down on two iron chairs, side by side, but not too close together. He saw that she was about to speak. She moved her clumsy shoe a few centimeters and deliberately crushed a twig. Her feet seemed to have grown broader, he noticed. I betrayed you, she said baldly. I betrayed you, he said. She gave him another quick look of dislike. Sometimes, she said, they threaten you with something you can't stand up to, can't even think about. And then you say, don't do it to me. Do it to somebody else. Do it to so-and-so. And perhaps you might pretend, afterwards, that it was only a trick and that you just said it to make them stop and didn't really mean it. But that isn't true. At the time when it happens, you do mean it. You think there's no other way of saving yourself. And you're quite ready to save yourself that way. You want it to happen to the other person. You don't give a damn what they suffer. All you care about is yourself. All you care about is yourself, he echoed. And after that, you don't feel the same towards the other person any longer. No, he said, you don't feel the same. And I think that was something O'Brien continuously tried to instill, was this individualistic mindset. And to get both of them to the breaking point where they were willing to give one another up, it almost reinforces the party's existence, that ultimately you only have yourself and you're only going to have yourself and you can only save yourself.
Yeah, that's kind of one of the main messages as well. And they're both, she says you can only save yourself. No, she, and she says you only care about yourself, and he repeats that back.
And that's what the party wants. They only want you to care about yourself and to care about the party, right? The only way you can survive is by being loyal to the party.
And that's what we're seeing throughout this whole book, where he's watching the proles and wondering why they're not uprising. But they're probably also looking at the party, or the people who work for the party, wondering why they're not uprising. And everyone's looking to someone else because they don't want to be the ones to do it, because then they're gonna face all this punishment, right? You're gonna come back to, like you said, saving yourself instead of saving the masses. And as hard as Winston did try, he broke, right? And I think we were both a little disappointed in that. And before that happens, he has this conversation with O'Brien, because throughout this whole book, Winston is also trying to figure out the why, right? As we all probably are, the why people are in power, why they have this need for power, why are they doing all of these heinous acts, why are they not just giving everyone happiness and freedom?
And O'Brien reveals a bit of the why. And what do we learn? It's all for power.
It's all for nothing, really, right?
It's all for nothing. It's all for the ruling class's ego, really.
Yeah. And did you want to read a quote? Um, where him and O'Brien are going back and forth about life in itself, and O'Brien again trying to break Winston down, and he keeps asking him the same questions over and over again, and pretty much just gaslighting him the whole time, right? And Winston is trying to hold on to his beliefs instead of conforming to the beliefs of the party.
Yes, so O'Brien says, you understand well enough how the party maintains itself in power. Now tell me why we cling to power. What is our motive? Why should we want power? Go on, speak, he added as Winston remained silent. Okay, so I'll skip down a little further ahead, and Winston knew in advance what O'Brien would say, that the party did not seek power for its own ends, but only for the good of the majority, that it sought power because men in the mass were frail, cowardly creatures who could not endure liberty or face the truth, and must be ruled over and systematically deceived by others who were stronger than themselves, that the choice for mankind lay between freedom and happiness, and that for the great bulk of mankind, happiness was better, that the party was the eternal guardian of the weak, a dedicated sect doing evil that good might come, sacrificing its own happiness to that of others. The terrible thing, thought Winston, the terrible thing was that when O'Brien said this, he would believe it. What can you do, thought Winston? against the lunatic who is more intelligent than yourself, who gives your arguments a fair hearing and then simply persists in his lunacy. You are ruling over us for our own good, he said feebly. So, in this moment, Winston is considering that Big Brother exists for the betterment of the population, that they need this ruling class to look over them and to be, like he said, the quote unquote eternal guardian. This is what he believes O'Brien will say, because that is part of their brainwashing, that is part of their principles. But we learn O'Brien reveals the truth. O'Brien tells him the existence of the party isn't for Winston and everyone else's own good. It's for mere power. It's not deeper than than what Winston really believes.
And again, I think throughout this, Winston also has a hope for Big Brother in a way, right? Like we said, where Julia mentions earlier how she thinks that the government's just dropping the bombs themselves and he can't even fathom that, right? Where he's even hoping maybe that O'Brien's going to agree with him here, where it's like, you're doing this for us, right? Like you're doing this for, there's a reason, right? Because he's like, I'm still not understanding the why, because there has to be a reason. And O'Brien's just kind of like, no. And I think more and more we're seeing that, especially in, talking about our real life, where there is the 1% and there are all these billionaires, and we're like, you just want all of this for what, right? We don't fathom that. We're like, what do you need all this money for? What do you need to feel this power for? And we talk about ego a lot on this channel, how it just feels like our government is just going on an endless power trip, right? And here at the end of that, O'Brien says, we're not interested in the good of others. We're not interested solely in power, not wealth or luxury or long life or happiness, only power, pure power. We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes the revolution in order to establish the dictatorship. Which I actually really like that line. I was like, wow, that's kind of crazy to think about, right? They're like, we created the revolt, we created the brotherhood, right? Which is something we saw too. We're like, is the brotherhood even real? And again, it gives people this kind of hope of like, maybe we can fight back, maybe there is a way out. But it also maintains the structure of power, right? What are you fighting back and what are you fighting against?
We start to piece it together. Yeah, there is no brotherhood. There probably isn't really an enemy. There is just this ruling class who wants power and solely desires power. Nothing more, nothing less. And in order to retain the power, they had to create an enemy. They had to create the brotherhood. Like you said, they had to create an illusion that there is a resistance, or there is an enemy. There is more meaning behind their robotic and even transactional existence, but in reality there isn't.
Again, all of this power that they have is possible because they're controlling everything, right? They're controlling what you see, they're controlling your day-to-day life. That's what we've been seeing throughout this whole book, right? And the main way that they're able to maintain this power, right, is through brainwashing, is through the power of the mind. And that's what we keep talking about. And that's one of the reasons we even have this book club, because we don't want them to take our minds away. We don't want to succumb to brain rot. We want to still believe what is true and the reality in front of us. And
also have the possibility to question everything around us, right? They, in this world, in this dystopian world in 1984, and in all the dystopian worlds we've read, they don't want you questioning anything, because questions lead to more questions, and then more questions lead to investigation, and then investigation, you know, it starts to lead into more and more people waking up and realizing
there is no need for this power dynamic, right? And they're like, yeah, there's no point in the power, but if you knew that, then you would be fighting back all the more quickly, right? And
right. And they don't want them happy. They don't want love, because this will all be a motivation to to dismantle that power dynamic, right? If you're unhappy, you're depressed, which we see in our current reality, and your sole focus is survival, paying your bills, trying to keep food on your table, you don't have the time to question anything more. You don't even have the strength to fight for anything more.
and one of the things that's mentioned in this book is 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? That's what we know is true. But if Big Brother and the party decide tomorrow that it's 5, then it's 5, right? And there's no questioning of that. And we even see that with Winston's job, right? Where he is in charge of rewriting certain things. And it's like, if this is who we said we've always been at war with, then this is it. And that's something that O'Brien's trying to reintegrate back into Winston, right? And they have this whole conversation back and forth about life in itself. And he even tells O'Brien, like, but how can you control matter? He burst out. You don't even control the climate or the law of gravity. And there are disease, pain, death. O'Brien silenced him by a movement of his hand. We control matter because we control the mind. Reality is inside the skull. You will learn by degrees, Winston. There is nothing that we could not do. Invisibility, levitation, anything. I could float off this floor like a soap bubble if I wished to. I do not wish to because the party does not wish to. You must get rid of those 19th century ideas about the laws of nature. We make the laws of nature. Sorry, that was on page 203. And then I'm just going to be jumping back and forth a little bit. And then on page 213, Winston is thinking about this conversation again. He's playing it in his head.
He starts to reflect on O'Brien's words.
And he says, if he thinks he floats off the floor, and if I simultaneously think I see him do it, then the thing happens. Right? And that's kind of Winston putting it all together. And he's like, well, if you believe it and I believe it, then it must be true, right? And that's just kind of how life and perception works, right? And it even says all happenings are in the mind. And we even see that today, where you could be shown a clear video of something happening and it sparks a whole debate between people of, well, no, this is what I saw in the video, and this is what I believe to be true. And the other person can be like, well, no, I saw this, and that's what I believe to be true.
And now with AI, we don't even know what is true. So yes, Winston's trying to search for concretes in life, right? Matter, the stars, science, and O'Brien is reinforcing these ideologies that all of the things you're naming, we control, we made up. We can go reach a star if we want to.
Right, we can rewrite that history. Again, as Winston knows, right? We can change it tomorrow that 2 plus 2 is 5.
He even mentions that there will be no science in the future.
Right, there's not really going to be anything in the future, which I think is sad and bleak. And we're already seeing that living in the future, right? Living in the future that Winston and Orwell are talking about. And we're already seeing this. I talked about this before, how we're losing color in things, right? There's not colorful cars anymore. Everything's gray and silver, and we're losing a lot. And in this book, you're like, how could we lose science? But again, perception is everything. There are people out there who are going to believe the moon is fake and the earth is flat, right? And there's nothing we can do to change their minds. That's their belief, right?
But then on the opposite spectrum, it's like, well, what if the government is creating the science they're telling us? So maybe questioning it is.
Right, and we're all looking for something tangible, right? We're all looking for something we can see and feel, and we're going outside, hopefully, and touching grass and touching the dirt and touching the flowers and watching things.
But then there's even fake grass, so.
That's what I'm saying, right? Where he's saying that too, where things are constantly changing. So it's like, what is real? What isn't real? Like, am I even real? Having this book is just a whole existential crisis, right? And that's it.
And that's it. And we see that there is a part within, I think there is still a part within the depths of Winston that knows Big Brother is bullshit, but he'll never be able to express that ever again. He'll never be able to rebel again. And we end the novel with him saying, with the narrator saying he had won the victory over himself. He loved Big Brother.
Yeah. And isn't it that he dies?
Does he die?
It says the long hoped for bullet was entering his brain. Because he had mentioned in the past how those 3 guys who rebelled, they were in the cafe and they heard the song and then they disappeared after that. And then he's in the cafe and he hears the song and he even knows, even though they've released me, they're going to kill me at any moment, right?
Right. But I thought that there was a part where Winston said, even if he is dying, he'll have that last moment of rebellion with the thought that he doesn't believe in the party. And that will be his last act of rebellion.
And that didn't happen.
But he doesn't do it.
He doesn't do it. But I also, we don't have time to get into this, but I also thought of this. I was also thinking about God and the Bible when reading this, and I didn't want to get too much into religion, and I thought it was interesting that religion wasn't brought up too much in this, but I kept thinking about how the Bible had been rewritten over and over again, and how at the end of your life, even if you're an atheist, you still end up being like, God save me. You come to some type of like prayer, hope for a heaven or hope for something better. So I didn't want to go too deep into that theory of it all, and I'm sure there's a deep dive out there comparing the two. And how at the end, yeah, he just was like, and I love Big Brother. Has some people go, well, yeah, and I love God, just in case,
Right. Right. He's like, even when I'm dying, maybe Big Brother's going to determine my afterlife. Even in my next life, I'll be stuck in Big Brother. And this is why I ended the book being more depressed than ever. But as cliche as it is, we still, in our modern times, have the possibility of hope and love and relationships. And I know we say this over and over again about community, but that's the importance of community, right? Because if you have the support and you have people that are willing to question the ruling class with you, then you're not alone, and you can't. But this is where I'm going back to Winston believing that it was all in the proles. And maybe there's a part of all of us that are like, okay, we'll find the proles in our society, and they'll be that. But we are the proles, right? We are the proles.
All waiting for the uprising. We're all waiting. We're like, all right, when you're ready, like, let me know, right? And I think we've talked about that before too. And we've even seen it with the Super Bowl or sports championships or a concert or celebrity idolization, how people can come together and form groups over these things. And we're like, okay, well, where are you guys when things matter and for the important things, right? And that's where Winston was like, you guys are all gathering for the little tiny saucepans.
For the barista cups.
For the barista cups.
for Orwell would hate Black Friday. He would be like, you all are sheeps. These are all just marketing tactics. This is all just manipulation.
Yeah. Well, we said we weren't going to film for 3 hours. And we did.
That's what this book takes, though. 3 hours. And there's, like you said, there's even more to talk about, and we never get to it. But we try to reference our books in future episodes, because there is so much within these novels, and we've mentioned this before, and we'll mention it again, that despite it being a fiction book, there's still so much meaning behind it and so much relations to our modern world. And it is was it a warning? Perhaps. But Orwell was already seeing the writing on the walls in his lifetime. And as we know, history continuously repeats itself.
For all we know, this was this was a real book, and this was a autobiography, and this actually occurred. And
for all we know, George Orwell was a time traveler. Let me stop. We need to
1984, flip it around.
What?
I said 1984, flip it around. What do you get? The year 4891. Anyway, yeah, we're losing it. I do want to talk about living in a surveillance state and things like that in a future video. And we, like I said, spoken on that topic briefly, how you could be just walking down the street and you're now in someone's video and you're now being called out across the internet. Right? We're all watching each other, basically. We are Big Brother.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for watching us. Let us know what you think about George Orwell's 1984. What were some of the themes you picked up on? What scared you the most from this story in relation to our modern world? Just let us know how you felt reading it. And if there were any points we didn't mention, please let us know in the comments below.
Yes, and we're so sorry that this review was late. We will do better with our next review. It's currently August, and we're reading our August book of the month, which is Lord of the Flies. And we will be posting updates on our community tab as much as we can. So always check there. And yeah, we're trying our best.
We're trying our best, but stay tuned. We do have more episodes to come outside of our book reviews. And share with your friends. Let them know about the Sheehan sisters. Join our book club. Stay tuned for our next episode, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.